Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's going to be me and Dennis this morning. William couldn't quite make it this morning. He's got some stuff to do and taking care of himself and getting a little rest this morning. And me and Dennis is going to continue the show, and we'll see how all this works out. If you,
Okay. You want to read? You want me to read the copyright disclaimer, sir?
yep, go right ahead.
Uh, okay. This channel may use some copyrighted materials without specific authorization of the owner, but contents used here falls under the fair use copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowances made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that may otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit educational or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. And there you go.
There you go.
And the formalities out of the way. How you doing this morning, sir?
I am doing well.
That's good. That's
Hope you're
good.
doing good.
Yes, sir. Just busy, busy bee. Of course, that keeps me out of trouble most of the time. Sometimes I get in trouble no matter what. That's the way it goes. And, I was talking about the show that I do, Demonology Today. It gets me in. I step on a lot of toes with that. It gets me in trouble some, but hey, that's part of the business. Okay. Can't hold back the punches.
Well, we had we're going live, I guess now every Thursday morning at 12:30 a.m. or Wednesday late night if you guys are all night owls. And me and Jane did a night owl lounge this last Wednesday, and we had quite a few people show up, and we went for 3 hours talking with the chat. And this last Wednesday, and we had quite a few people show up, and we went for 3 hours talking with the chat last Wednesday. Is that on your end, Dennis?
Yeah, I lost you there for a minute. You okay now?
Yeah, I'm fine. I was just hearing myself repeating. I didn't know if it was coming through you or not.
That's some weird stuff going on. They're probably tinkering around with us already there. Geryl, that's the way it goes. But anyway, that's the Night Owl Lounge. Yeah, check. Everybody out there needs to check it out. And what other shows you got going on? You got the Night Owl Lounge, and what else have you got?
We got Piercing the Veil on Sundays at 6 p.m. Central. And that's the one that we have all the guests on and interview people. And this week we got Bigfoot Michigan Rob from Texas Front Porch Platform. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get into Bigfoot and stories and all kinds of stuff with him.
Yeah, that sounds good. Did you happen to see that that thing? I think it was on Fox News the other day about those so-called witches that were feasting off of a carcass out in the woods that they actually captured on security camera footage. You hear about that?
Yeah, I think you sent me that actually.
Yeah, I thought I did. Wasn't you? Remember if I did or not? But that's very interesting. They call them witches, but I don't know if that's really what the case was. They look more like feral type of people, wild people looking. I don't know. I would have loved to have seen more. All they did was give us screen captures. I would love to have seen the actual video. Before, after, during, and all that, Geryl, if you ever get into that situation, you need to see the whole thing from the, before, during, and after. That tells you much more of the story. So once somebody just takes one thing out and shows it to you, it's kind of hard to go by that, I've warned people in the past, do not go out in the woods alone, and especially don't go unarmed. because you do not know what you're going to run into out there. You never know.
Yeah, that's a pretty well known trick or a way of doing that. If you just show a small picture or a clip of something, then you can control the narrative any way you want.
Well, that's called taking it out of context. And whenever anything's taken out of context, there's a lot of room for it to be misconstrued. You know, it can be misunderstood. I like to see the whole thing, and therefore you can make a little more. But here's my number one rule when it comes to stuff like that. I can't really vouch for it unless I know absolutely who took it or I was there. You know what I'm saying? Under what circumstances. Other than that, I can't go with it. But that is very strange, and this is supposed, a capture off of the surveillance cameras that they actually, I think, put out in the woods around this deer carcass. And these three people actually showed up, and it looks like one person that's standing. See, it's like I say, these screen captures can be misleading. I'd love to see the whole thing, but it looks like somebody is standing behind one of these women, and the two of these women are almost completely naked. I think they've got loincloths on. But right behind one of them looks like a man standing there, and he's got pants on. So I don't know. It's kind of a weird, bizarre thing, but it sort of made, I call it the paranormal news for the week there. Yeah.
I was just kind of wondering if it was more of a like ritual or some kind of thing they were doing out in the woods while the women, or it looked like just the women. There might have been another guy there. Usually,
rituals do not entail carcasses that much. You know what I'm saying? It's usually a ritual, is a living sacrifice type thing. I won't get into that. It's a very deep, dark subject. But that just didn't look like you don't just find something in the woods and do a ritual on it, kind of a thing. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't follow. It doesn't follow the lines of organized ritualistic stuff. But there again, I could be wrong. People are able to do anything, so you never know. People are funny that way. What's that Doors song? People are strange. That's
it. Yeah, people are definitely strange.
Yeah. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about folklore and urban legends, since we're talking about some weird stuff out in the woods. We got some urban legends. Well, what's your favorite urban legend?
Well, growing up, my brothers and sisters, since I was the youngest, when we'd go on little vacations or weekend things, we had the old station wagon, and just like everybody pictures or whatever, all of us kids were in the back, and my brothers and sisters, or at least my brother, would always tell the story of the hitchhiker with the hook, that would.
Oh yeah, the hook, yeah. My favorite part of that is when the boyfriend tells the girl, "Don't get out of the car, no matter what happens. Don't get out of the car." Remember that? Yeah. And later on, she hears this noise on top of the car, and the cops show up and they say, "Get out, but don't look back. Come walk towards us. Don't look back." But she looks back, and her dead boyfriend's hanging from a tree over the car, and he's scraping the top of the car in the wind. That's it. Very horror movie stuff there, definitely. That's an interesting. Here's the interesting thing about urban legends, and I've encountered a lot of them over the years, and of course, most of them are a bunch of bunk. Okay, but everyone has a seed of truth to them. Usually, there's a little, seed of something that started it. But the interesting thing about it is how they grow in legend. They start a little bit small and get bigger and bigger. More stories are put on it, and it's always like, a friend of my friend of my friend of my friend told me about this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's hard to pin them down, to really pin them down, And here's the interesting thing: in this place where I live, there's a bridge, a haunted bridge. It has a lot of stories to it. I've actually went there and investigated it. It's got a lot of satanic symbols. It's been spray painted on it too, by the way. But it's on private property now. You can't go there. But anyway, it's called Crybaby Bridge. Of course, the story is that there's a woman threw her baby off, and her ghost haunts the bridge and all this stuff. And here's the funny thing, Geryl. There's like dozens of Crybaby Bridges all over the country.
Yeah.
More than dozens. There's a bunch of them. And and that's like what you said there about the hook. And then there's the ghostly hitchhiker. That's the most famous one of all. They pick the girl up and she disappears. You know, um, it's fun, and some of these things spread worldwide, Geryl, not just here in this country. Like the ghost of the hitchhiker, I've heard stories in Italy, France, Spain. The list goes on and on and on. This girl gets around. Okay, she's a
Right.
world traveling ghost. But that's what that would have to be the most famous urban legend of all, the ghostly hitchhiker.
Yeah, you always hear about well, especially in the paranormal, you hear about the woman beside the road, and sometimes there's wedding dresses or young girls, look like they're looking for something, or there's also kind of so many variants of the same kind of story.
Oh yeah, and it gets repeated over and over and over again, and it can be put in different locales. But the interesting thing, we have a sort of a ghostly hitchhiker not far from where I live. That's really not a girl; it's a man, and he supposedly died in an airplane crash, small airplane, and Cessna, something like that. And he died on a rainy day. And he has a yellow rain slicker on, and people pick him up. And he tells them, I've been in an accident. I got to get somewhere or something. And when they are taking him down the road, they go so far down the road that they look back and he has disappeared out of the back seat, and there's like a puddle of water there. That's all that's left,
Uh,
to show that he was in. But it can be, and here's the interesting part of it. He could be soaking wet, like he come out of rain, and be a clear day when they pick him up.
yeah. So where'd
So
he come from?
what you're doing, you're dealing with, are you interdimensional, or is it a residual type haunting? Why is he still wet? It's very interesting to think about that. There's so much about the paranormal that we don't know, so much supposition on things that we can't pin down. And here's what I've always told people over the years, and it stands true. The number one rule of the paranormal, the supernatural, whatever name you want to, umbrella you want to put over this, the number one rules is always expect the unexpected. That's just the way that goes. That's number one rule. Especially when you deal with mysteries, and a lot of the Earth mysteries. That's what I call them. The strange ghost lights, stuff like that. They fall into that category too. And there's a lot of superstition, folklore, and urban legends about some of these lights, that are seen. Like the very famous Mako light. I think it's in somewhere in South Carolina. The very famous Brown Mountain lights. I know you've heard of them.
Oh yeah.
The Martha lights in Texas. You have them everywhere. Probably there's some in your state. It's part of urban legend. I call it the
Right.
ghost lights.
When we sit in our sunroom out back, looking at the night sky or whatever, and we have a train track that we can see, and we always see at night, especially in the fog, really creepy. You see the train light coming down, and me and Jane always talk about the ghost trains and stuff that we used to hear about as kids, and that just reminds me of Lincoln's burial, funeral train.
Mm-hmm.
Since we live here in Illinois,
That's a lot of ghost trains across the country. Not only those, a lot of them are connected with the Civil War in the West, out west. I think even I remember the singer Marty Robbins even did a song called The Ghost Train, very famous legend about different ghost trains. But the interesting thing about, and I've done a little research on the ghost train phenomena, mostly they're never sighted. You don't ever hardly, you just hear the whistle, way off. That's what you hear more. They shouldn't be there, by the way. Trains do not whistle like that anymore. They got big horns now, big
Right.
diesel horns, but they don't whistle anymore.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
haven't actually ever saw a ghost train or anything, but it just makes you think of it when you see that light coming down the tracks at night. It's kind of eerie.
Yeah, that would be eerie, definitely. I agree with what you said about Louisiana. One of my favorite states for hauntings is haunting to the high heavens.
Oh
Louisiana
yeah,
is an interesting state, definitely. That's one of my favorites. It's
yeah.
a very strange place.
Not only do you got urban legends and stuff, but when you mix in the voodoo and all that stuff down there.
Yeah, Rougarou and all that stuff. Yeah, it's a very interesting state. I tell you the interesting thing about Louisiana. It's although it's part of the Louisiana Purchase, Napoleon sold it to us while he was in the bathtub. The interesting thing about, boy, did he make a bad deal too, by the way. And the interesting thing about Louisiana, it was such a hodgepodge of so many different cultures, and potpourri of everything like this. So it would definitely, have a lot of history and a lot of supernatural activity with it. Most definitely. I got my dog here. He just woke up. I'm sorry, did I wake you up, sir? Go back to sleep.
Poor dog.
I would pick him up and let you see him, but I don't think he'd appreciate it.
No.
He's a mid-sized dog. He's not small as William's dog. He's a pretty good size. He's a Cocker Spaniel. Right now he's got a lot of hair on. I got to get him clipped. We'll get his summer clipping there.
Yeah.
There's a dog under there somewhere. I don't know. But anyway. But getting back to urban legends, there are certain areas, just like Illinois, certain states and areas that seem to have more history for these things than other things, especially like you talk about the Lincoln funeral train. And it went through a lot of different states, by the way. It was a long tour for it. But anything like that that's connected with a lot of trauma, sorrow, a lot of emotional thing that are going on, seems to take a long time for it to ever really truly go away. It lingers on and on and on, the memory of it, and that's the interesting thing about residual type hauntings. They're very much just like a time machine. You're looking back in time and seeing a scene that's playing over again. That fascinates me. That's a part of the paranormal that's always fascinated me. And that's connected with a whole lot of these urban legends and stuff, because you're seeing this stuff over again.
Well, you got Lincoln, such a prominent figure, at the Civil War and all the stuff that happened during his presidency. And, and then, you have his assassination, then you have the funeral train, and it was just across the nation so prominent in the news and stuff. I just think that just attributed to everybody telling these stories. Then you get
an interesting thing, Geryl, the way he died. If he just, died from natural causes or something. But assassinations seem to have their own little patina around them, they're the stuff that legends are made of, definitely. And under the circumstances that he died, and a lot of people don't realize this, he actually foresaw his own death. He actually had a vision of his own death. And here's another thing. His wife was very deep into the occult. She would have seances, and he had to participate. Of course, you know how it goes with wives. They got to have some participation, definitely. and he would participate in some of these seances in the White House. So the atmosphere was already set for a lot of this, and all.
Well, that's what I was getting ready to say. You know, they had all the seances, and they already had ghost stories from the White House already. And then you got Lincoln. You know, then
Hmm.
he dies in a weird way. So I would imagine there'd be all kinds of stories, and probably that's why they kept going, because he was such a prominence in history.
Well, I tell you what, if I ever had a chance to investigate the White House, I would definitely camp out in the Lincoln bedroom. Okay, that would be where I would
Right.
definitely go, because that's where his ghost is supposedly seen so much. And I think there was one visitor to the White House one time. There was a knock on the door, and they opened the door, and Abraham Lincoln was standing there. Gee, that would be neat to investigate that, definitely.
Oh yeah. I doubt if I'd ever get invited to the White House, but it'd be neat to be there.
Yeah, but it would be. That's like there's several places I would definitely go. It's on my bucket list, which will probably never get filled, I'm sure. But one of them would be the White House. The other one would be the Alamo or the Custer Battlefield. Different places of history around. Of course, I would definitely do Dracula's Castle, no doubt about it. Uh, that's where I would head for. So if I ever go there, I'll take you with me, Geryl.
All right.
Yeah, we'll hook up and fly over there one day.
There you go. Maybe
We
we
might
can
even
get
we might even take Jane with us. You never know.
maybe we can get um Danielle Diva to show us the castle or something.
Hell yeah, yeah. Yeah. I tell you what, that's what I told somebody. If I ever got that opportunity, you're not going to put this old boy in there for 24 hours. I'm going to take a couple of weeks on that, okay? That's just the way that goes. I'm sorry, but bring my luggage and everything, because I'm gonna spend some time on that. It's not gonna be a hit and run mission. And that's the interesting thing about all of this. That's what people do. They hit and run on this, and really, and I've said this, but you've got to remember this stuff. Whether they're the actual ghosts of people, or they're the residual haunting, whatever it may be, they're on their time, not your time. Okay, and you need to realize that, and you need to give them time to manifest or show up or do whatever it is they're going to do. You can't just go in there for 8 hours and expect to really get anything.
Right.
You got to live in that environment for a while. It's just the way it goes. So, but nobody wants to do that.
Yep. Yeah, you can't just show up for a little ghost tour or whatever and think you're going to see everything happening all at one time. I mean,
Right. Well, what gets me, if you go in for 6 or 8 hours and something actually happens, you've been incredibly lucky. You know what I'm saying? That's just like that proverbial needle in a haystack. It's that hard to get. You've been incredibly lucky if you get something, because usually that don't happen. The Hollywood fallacy of it all is that you walk in a haunted location and boom, something happens. Not necessarily. That doesn't happen every time. Uh, you just got to be in the right place at the right time. Oh yeah, the Stockholm Metro. I've heard of the Silver Arrow. Yeah, that's an interesting legend too. Um, and there are a lot of legends attributed to transportation, such as automobiles. And of course, you've heard the story of Large Marge, Phantom 309.
right.
The ghost trucks that run the highways. There is a ton of paranormal stuff on the highways and the roads and byways of this country and the world. Some weird stuff happen out there on long, lonely highways out in the middle of nowhere. Let me tell you a quick story right quick. I had a trucker told me this story, that he pulled over one night, and it was way out in the middle of nowhere. It might have been somewhere in the deserts of Arizona, somewhere. And he pulled over and got in the back, got in the cab, and he was going to take a nap before we finished driving. And said that this was out in the middle of nowhere, around nothing, miles anywhere. Said he's laying in there. He's just about asleep in the back of the cab when there's a knocking on his window. You know. Well, he got up and said, oh, heck, it's probably the highway patrol or something, wanting to know if I'm all right, something that bothering me when I'm trying to get to sleep here. And he looks out the window, but no, it's not that. There's a young woman standing out there, out in the middle of nowhere. She's got this long black hair. He said her face was just deathly white, pale, and her eyes were dark. You couldn't see her eyes. They were just dark holes like. And she's looking back at him. He said, that scared the crap out of him. Said, out in the middle of nowhere. He looked around. There's no car. There's nothing. He said, I got under the wheel and I gunned that truck out of there. He said, he remembered he saying, help me, Jesus, let me get out of here. It scared him that bad. He was a big old trucker. Like nothing would bother this guy. And he said he got the heck out of there and said that he would never stop on that road anymore. He went down that road several other times. That was sort of a track that he had to go down. But he said he would never stop there again. That was it. And he said that girl is out of nowhere, in the middle of nowhere like that at night, in the middle of the night, that would have to be disturbing, definitely.
Then you have the cases where people are stranded, or the one that comes to mind is where the woman has a flat tire and she's on a road and there's nobody coming one way or another, and all of a sudden the next thing she knows, a car pulls up behind her and a guy gets out and helps her change her tire and stuff, and she thanks him and stuff, and then she turns to take care of the kids or whatever. The next thing you know, she says the car's gone. So, like it was never there. She didn't see any cars on the road again either way, and you got stuff like that happening all the time.
Well, there's a very famous story, Geryl, about this lady. Her son was coming home from college. He had to drive something like 500 miles to get back home or something, and he started out, a blizzard hit, and she started praying, that he would safely get home. And he told her the story later that, that he was out in the middle of nowhere. His car was stranded. He was stuck out in this blizzard, and this tow truck shows up. And the tow truck, he's only 50 miles from home, something like that. This tow truck hooks him up, and the guy says, I'll get you home. Don't worry about it, bud, And this tow truck tows him all the way back home, So when he gets in the house, he tells his mother, this nice guy, pulled me all the way home. She said, well, let's go thank him. And they go out there. There's no truck anywhere. And said, and here's the interesting thing. You can look all the way up the road on the fallen snow. There was no tracks that would have led away from it was just his car sitting there. There were no tracks from the tow truck leaving. Yep. Where did that tow truck come from?
Right.
Was that an angelic type thing there? It sounds like it. So you have a lot of urban legends like that may actually be true, encounters of things like that. But I remember one trucker told me there's a certain part, I think it was in Texas, where the truckers they have to go around a curve, and they said they don't like to slow down because this woman will jump on the handrail, up on the side of the truck. And she looks awful, and it says she's a ghost is what she is, and she's trying to hitch a ride with, and she jumps up on the foot rails and all that, and they don't like to slow down there. They like to gun it around there, on account of that. That's interesting.
We were talking about bridges, earlier. You were talking about Crybaby Bridge and stuff. I remember the story of and I don't think it's the same bridge, but where you park your car and the engine will start when you're not in it, when you're out there on the bridge looking for the entities or whatever, your lights will flash and horns will go off, and the car doors will lock. You can't get in. And when the moment's over, everything's just back to normal and you can get in your car and leave. But there's something about the car or something that the entity or whatever it is takes over.
Well, that very famous story, I think it's in Texas. a railroad crossing in Texas where supposedly a busload of kids were killed by a train. And they say if you'll park on that train track, that you'll be pushed over the train track to safety if you park there, and there'll be little handprints on the back of your car. That's neat. Very neat urban legend. We had one similar to that not far from where I live. And so I investigated it, found out there was never ever any wreck at that. There was never anybody killed at that crossing. It was just a story that got started, probably from that one in Texas. So it's interesting, Geryl, how these urban legends go from area to area. And I think now with the internet and all this stuff, the communications of the world, a lot of this has increased to a great deal. A lot of these urban legends now take on not just a life of their own, but legs and everything else. They move around real good, better than we do. Thanks to social media, definitely.
Yeah, Aussie Sue was talking about her grandparents and heading home one evening or in their buggy, and a woman ran out and spooked their horse.
Oh yeah.
You ever hear of very many olden days, of the horse and buggy, stuff like that happening? I mean, we always hear in modern times about automobiles, but is there any urban legends about horses and carriages?
Well, I actually have one in my family. There is nearby where I live. There's a cemetery, and this lady is supposed to reside, unfortunately, in this cemetery. And she was supposedly killed in an accident. I think it may have been murder. I'm not going to get too deep into that because this is going to be one of my Midnight Road stories. But my grandfather, he was a young boy. He was like, I think, with his uncle or something, and they were in a wagon. There was a wagon with mules, and they were pulling a bale of cotton into town. And once you had to go to town, I think, and weigh your cotton or whatever they did back in those days to sell it, you had to weigh it, so much a pound, Anyway, they had this bale of cotton on the wagon, and they were passing by the cemetery. And all of a sudden, the mules shied. They stopped. When a mule stops, it's kind of hard to get them started back again. They're very hard-headed animals. So the mules just stopped in the middle of the road right here next to the cemetery. And my grandfather, who was a little boy, he might have been maybe 10 years old or something. His uncle stood up and said, "Did you see that?" And my grandfather said, "No, what are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, there's a lady passed across right in front of our wagon and went into the cemetery." And he said, "Uncle, I did not see that." He said, "I didn't see anything. I see the mule stop." And he said, "You didn't see that." He couldn't understand. He said, "Come on now, you're telling me a lie. You had to see that woman. She had a parasol. This is part of the story I'm going to tell one day about this lady. She dresses in Victorian era looking clothes. And he described her, and this is one of the things that got me interested in this case. Definitely, this has happened to my grandfather. And my grandfather told me years later when I talked to him about this, he said, Dennis, I did not see anything. There was nothing there, but he saw something. It scared him so bad that he talked about it for years after that. He saw that. He said he didn't imagine it. He wasn't drinking. He didn't touch it. He never touched a drop. It wasn't nothing like that. He saw this, and it was in broad daylight, too, by the way. It wasn't at night. And wow. So when I investigated this, I heard about this. I said, well, I'm going to go check this out. And all of a sudden, this story begins to unfold for me about this thing. I got very interested. I said, hey, I got confirmation in a way here that somebody actually saw something. And they weren't the first people to see this woman cross that road and go into the cemetery. And let me tell you one more thing about this. You know what Walpurgis night is? I told you about that. It's supposed to be one of the most evil nights of the year. Well, one night I was outside this cemetery, very same cemetery, on the sidewalk, right where this happened. Okay. And you can't, according to state law, unless you have permission. And I've been in a lot of cemeteries at night. I had permission to be there, but by state law, after sundown, you're not supposed to be in the cemetery. You can get in big trouble. So I didn't have permission that night, and so I was shooting. I had a tripod and a camera set up. This was not a video camera; it was a regular, camera. And I had it set up on a tripod, Cheryl, and I was shooting through the fence. And it's a wrought iron fence, so there wasn't no problem, I was shooting through the fence into the cemetery. I said, I'm gonna get a picture on Walpurgis night of this cemetery, kind of thing. And while I'm looking through the shutter, focusing, getting everything set up, something walks right in front of my camera. But it's so close. It's so close that it's blurred. You can't see what it is, But I mean, it's definitely something passed in front of my camera, and it was not a moth. It wasn't a mosquito. It wasn't a close-up shot of that. This was like somebody walking by, just like that. And I look up, immediately I go, "What? There's nothing there. There's nothing there." I said, "Well, what the heck was that?" And here's what made me really mad about it. I couldn't take a picture of it. That's why I told you about the unexpected. If I had been expecting that, I might could have got you a shot of that, but it wouldn't have done any good. It was that close up to my camera, see?
Right.
But that was and here's what I said was very interesting about that. Whatever it may have been, and I can't absolutely say 100% that it was a ghost. It could have been something else. I don't know, but it wasn't a shadow there were street lights around. It wasn't anything like that. But here's the whole thing. I said the interesting thing, it makes it, to me, the most interesting part, is exactly where the location was that took place at, and the history of it. That made it interesting to me. But you never know when you're going to run into something like that.
Well, speaking of cemeteries and stuff, there's a lot of myths and folklore around here where we live of cemeteries and stuff like that, and ghosts that come out at midnight. And the one I was told when I was a kid, that there's an old family cemetery out on a farm outside our town, quite a ways out. And at midnight, a ghostly appearance of a young woman will appear by an old well on the farm. Like she's wailing and screaming, kind of an eerie, ghostly way. And legend has it that somehow she had wandered off, during the night or whatever, whether she was going to go meet somebody or not. The story varies, whoever you hear it from. But she supposedly fell down inside the well. And at midnight, she comes out, and is either searching for her friend or whoever she was supposed to meet, or her family or whatever. But supposedly on midnights, on certain evenings during the time of her death, she'll come out, and you'll supposedly can hear her scream and cry.
Well, it's interesting, Geryl, to think about all the many different supernatural things that are connected with cemeteries. I mean, there's a definite connection with vampires, werewolves, and the demonic with cemeteries. No doubt about that. I mean, werewolves are supernatural creatures. But here's the interesting thing, that there have been many cases of Bigfoot and Doll Man being connected with cemeteries. What's going on with that? Places of the dead are a definite draw to the demonic. That's like a magnet, iron fillings to a magnet thing there going on. That seems to be the case, especially with any kind of paranormal activity, whatever it may be. That seems to be one of the centers for these things. So cemeteries always get me very suspicious about things like that, because they're hot spots. And I've had a lot of interesting experiences in cemeteries my own self, like that vampire I met in Charleston, the different things that I've had happen in different cemeteries. I like cemeteries to that extent. They're hotbeds of activity sometimes, and they're not just basically ghosts. Here's the interesting thing, Geryl. More stuff occur at cemeteries than just ghosts. Sightings of ghosts. Other things happen there too. That's what makes interesting stuff on cemeteries. And here's another thing. And cemeteries are very intricate to certain types of witchcraft and voodoo. They play important parts in that. Look at graveyard dirt that they use and things like that. You know about graveyard dirt. They use it in
Right.
ceremonies. They use it in ceremonies, and you got to get specific graveyard dirt. You don't just go in and get some dirt. You got to get that certain dirt off of an evil person's grave or a good person's grave to do certain
Right.
things. Uh, these things, cemeteries are really centers for a lot of this stuff. And I've told that to a lot of people over the years. I've mentored people in groups. I say, go there. I've had some interesting experiences there. That's where you need to go. Um, I've also actually several times taught classes in cemeteries on investigation and how to do things and all that. So they're perfect ground for the paranormal, definitely.
Yeah, I know. In my early years, I was doing genealogy of the family and relatives and stuff, and I met quite a few people that were into that. So I walked almost every graveyard cemetery, especially rural cemeteries. I walked every one of them out here in our county and a couple counties over, and helping out the historical society and genealogy society, and you start talking to these people, and there's all kinds of stories of family members or just all kinds of stuff happening in the cemeteries that are just kind of weird once in a while.
A lot of urban legends associated with cemeteries. There's the one cemetery story I heard that a hearse is seen sometimes at night inside the cemetery, and there will not be a hearse. There won't be a funeral. Nobody has funerals at night. Okay.
Right.
What the heck is that hearse doing out there? And they say it never comes out onto the road. It always disappears in the cemetery somewhere. Nobody never comes out. That's a very interesting story. And also, there's the very, I think this is another sort of kind of baby Bruce type thing. There's the story of a man who was very cruel to horses. He would beat these horses mercilessly. And then when he died, a horse's head appeared in the cracks on his tombstone, sort of like their revenge, I guess. I've actually tried to track that urban legend down. There's supposed to be one nearby where I live. And there's another one that's very sad in a way about a young girl who really loved horses. I mean, that was her life. She would ride in competition and things like that with horses. She absolutely was a big horse nut. She loved horses to death. And she got cancer and died. And they said that on her tombstone, a horseshoe appeared. It's sort of like their last little, goodbye to her. That's a very sad story. But that's interesting. I've always wanted to track that one down to see if it was true. I've seen pictures supposedly of that tombstone, and it does look like a definite horseshoe
Wow.
on there. Yeah.
That kind of reminds me, you're talking about headless horsemen and stuff, like growing up, watching Disney or whatever and having Ichabod Crane, and the headless horseman stories. And,
Oh yeah.
and there is quite a few headless horseman stories around.
Oh yeah, all over the world, Geryl. There's a very famous one in Ireland. I can't think of the name of what they give to him, but it's a very prevalent, another one of those prevalent legends that are all over the headless man. I remember the story of that was told to me by an older man that one day when he was a kid, he was walking through the woods. It was on the edge of a battlefield, an old battlefield. I think it was a Revolutionary War battlefield. And said he heard somebody walking behind him. He was going through the leaves in the woods, if anybody knows, you can't walk in the woods without making a noise. But he was walking through the woods, and he's hearing this somebody but walking behind him, and he turns around, look, but there's nothing there. So he says, that's odd, maybe it's an echo or something. So he gets to the very end of the wood line before he ever gets to the road, and he turns around, and he sees a man walking behind him. And he's like maybe 20 foot behind him, something like that, and he doesn't have a head. The man standing there with no head. And so he said he found out years later about that battlefield, and there was a man that actually had a cannonball take his head off in that battle. Very
Oh
interesting
man.
story.
Yeah.
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 Cemeteries and graveyards and all kinds of stuff. I mean, like you said, it's always traumatic anyway. And families have stories and relatives have stories. And then some people just make up stories, to go
Oh yeah.
along or kind of add to the story, I should say, not necessarily make up, but
Yeah. Well, that's where you gotta watch that blurred line between imagination and the truth. Something that really happened. But like I said, every myth and legend has that little kernel of truth to it. Definitely.
here
You just gotta
we'll
find it.
address this. Scott, William's just not feeling very well, a little under the weather, and he just needed a little time to rest and take care of himself. Nothing major's going on that we know of. It's just a little under the weather, with his medical condition. He just needs time to rest a little bit because
Yeah,
he tries
yeah,
to burn
rest.
the candle at both ends and wears himself down and taking care of the family and himself, just like all of us. Sometimes it just gets a little too much and you just got to take a little rest time.
Yeah, rest gives you time to recharge the old batteries a little bit there, definitely. We all need that once in a while.
So if you guys can all see the banner down there scrolling, he has a GoFundMe. So if you guys would all like to help William and his family out, with his medical expenses or whatever, feel free to go there and show
Yep,
him some love and help him out. And he'd very much appreciate it. And we'd
uh,
appreciate it if he'd show him some love.
absolutely. Sharing is caring, definitely.
So I just
Hey,
wanted to address that since Scott put it up asking, and I'm sure other people are wondering what's going on with William, and
yeah,
he
oh
just
yeah,
he just needed a little time to regenerate and get his health back up to normal. So he's been putting in a lot of hours on the shows and adding more shows, and sometimes it
yeah.
just gets a little overwhelming and wears you down.
That can take a toll there, definitely can wear you down the more you do, definitely. Uh, we're all just human, you know.
Yep.
But getting back to the urban legends and stuff like that, have you got one nearby where you live that you've looked into or anything?
Usually I just hear that, like I've been telling you, I just hear the stories, secondhand, from, like the woman at the well. And
Oh yeah,
we have stories of ghost dogs and the ghost train, obviously,
oh
and I mean, it's just the
yeah.
normal stories that everybody else hears. And
Wouldn't it be neat to get you a sound bite on that ghost train, the whistle on
oh
that
yeah.
ghost train? That would have been neat, wouldn't it? Here's the thing about ghost sounds. You don't hear too much about the ghost sound part of it. The audio. Uh, the interesting thing about them, they're usually kind of way off. They're way in the background. That's when you got to really listen. Really, that's where recording comes in to help you out a lot. But I have had a lot of residual sounds like that. I investigated an old train station one time, and we actually picked up some residual sounds. I couldn't figure out what they were, and I got to listening to them over there. And actually, what it basically was, I think, was actually luggage or something being loaded. That's what it sounded like. The
Oh,
noises you would make. Very residual. But there was one interesting part of this train station where they wanted me to actually do a location blessing of the place because they'd had a lot of paranormal activity. The women were getting pinched a little bit and things were going on. So they wanted me to cleanse it for them, and I was going around doing this, doing this, what you got to do. And I actually had a bottle of salt knocked out of my hand, and it was knocked smack out of my hand and hit the wall about 10 feet away. It wasn't just dropping it, okay? It was hit. And in this certain area in the corner there. So I go back and I tell that, well, I just picked it up and kept going. You don't let it stop, whenever you run into these things. But I went back and said, could you tell me what the history is of this section over here? She said, oh, let me see. Oh, yeah. So that's where they stacked the coffins that were transported during the Civil War. I said, interesting. Interesting. According to German folklore, atop a steep rock on the Rhine River, there once lived an exquisite nymph named Laura Lee. Oh, yeah, Laura Lee. I've heard of that. She dressed in white and wore wreath of stars in her hair. Very famous legend, Jeezy. Laura Lee. Yeah. Women in white. That's a very prevalent urban legend or legend. The women in white. Then you have women in black too, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah, if you talk about the Rhine River and stuff, you have over there in Europe and the UK, you have the Lady of the Lake and all, you have all that stuff that goes along with the knights and all that stuff. There's all kinds of water legends.
Water nymphs are very well-known thing too, and some of them are malevolent. They will drag you under and drown you.
Yeah.
Yeah, they will lure you there with their beauty and take care of it. Sort of like the sirens in the story of Ulysses, There's a very interesting things. I think there's a lot of prevalent legends with that in Ireland, by the way. And when people migrated to this country, Geryl, they brought their legends with them. They brought their stories and their legends. That's how the werewolves showed up in America, and the vampires and a lot of the witchcraft and all that. Look at the Pennsylvania Dutch. They were very, very superstitious about witchcraft and all that. With the hexen symbols, the hexen wolf, by the way, is one of their stories, which is sort of like the Wayo, which is about the Wayo that's sighted in Pennsylvania and places like that, and West Virginia and all that. It's supposed to be part of the hexen wolf. There's a lot of their supernatural beliefs always travel with them, definitely.
Now,
but that's good. That's good.
Do you think a lot of these urban myths and folklore came over, obviously with the immigrants, whether you had the Dutch or the German and all them, that brought from the old world, if you want to call it that, all these stories with them, and they just kind of grew into their own stories here in the U.S.
Oh yeah, that Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, all that stuff came over on the boat. The indigenous people didn't have Santa Claus, so we showed up. That's the way things get passed around from community to community, from locale to locale, from country to country. We bring these things with us because they are part of our culture. They are part of us, an important part of us. We should never lose sight of that fact. They are what make us us. It's very important, and we don't need to forget it. We don't need to let it leave our history. We need to preserve it because it's a snapshot of us. It's a very important part of our culture, our makeup. And that's what I find so interesting about anthropology. And I'm sort of an amateur anthropologist myself, is the cultural beliefs. So not only just the religions, but the cultural beliefs of people and superstition. It's fascinating. The superstitions of people, look at just one item, the mirror. How many superstitions are connected with a mirror, And here's an interesting thing, Geryl. The mirror used to be an expense like a large screen TV or something. You handled it very carefully. You didn't want to mess with it because it was very expensive. You didn't you didn't go to Walmart and buy another mirror back then. That was it. And most of those mirrors had real mercury or silver backings to them. So they were very valuable stuff. And that's why they warn you not to break it, not to do certain things, And to this day, there are many people that the mirror is sort of an almost magical item, per se, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it was quite an expense, for the time. You'd spend a lot of money on that. And that's why a lot of people, have grandma's hair sets with the mirror and comb, because the comb might have been made out of bone or ivory. And, like you said, mercury was very expensive to make the mirror. And, you're
Yeah.
lucky, a lot of families were lucky if they even had a mirror back in the day.
When you didn't, you had a pool of water, and that was the only way you could see yourself. And that wasn't very good. Think about that. It'd be very still. You might could get a bowl or something and look at yourself, but that was through them. Is that expression through a mirror darkly? It had to be very frustrating. But the interesting thing about mirrors are viewed as almost doorways, interdimensional doorways or portals. I've seen some very interesting things happen with mirrors, and I'm not just talking about scrying and stuff like that. Um, I've warned people it's not really a good idea to cross mirrors because they say that mirrors that face each other like at an angle create what looks like a portal.
Right.
They go on and on and on forever the way they look. And it's really not a good idea to mess around with anything like that because you could open that, possibly use that to open some type of doorway. It wouldn't be that far fetched because mirrors are an interesting thing. The mystical part of the mirror is that it shows us the world behind us, the reverse world. That's an interesting aspect of it. It shows us another world other than what we're in, and so to speak, in that contaction. But the whole thing is the mirror has so many superstitions attached to it. It's fascinating. You could write a book on just the mirror superstition. There were so many of them. Like they would cover the mirrors when somebody died in the house because they believed that your soul could become trapped in that mirror.
Right.
If it left the body, the soul could get in that mirror. And they believed if you stayed in that mirror, you would haunt that place for a long, long time. That was it. You would be haunting. And here's the many, many cases I've had of people, actually, Geryl, who come to me and say, I was looking at myself in the mirror and I saw something behind me. That happens a lot, and they say, I turn around, there's nothing there. Could it be that the mirror is showing you something other than the reality of what you're in at that time? It's very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stories, of people being trapped in mirrors and, people seeing other images in the mirror besides their own. I mean, it's just such a fascinating thing. And then the folklore or the myth behind it, if you actually get a spirit to go into your mirror, you're supposed to break it or crack it to trap them in there.
And Lewis Carroll's very famous Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass. She went to another dimension through it. Definitely interesting. Another thing about the mirror, which is used, the scrying thing about that, is it has been used for prophetic reasons for a long time. The scrying is supposed to show you those other dimensions we mentioned earlier, and show you portents of things that are to come, or maybe things that have happened in the past. A lot of the old medieval psychics or mediums use scrying very, very much. Nostradamus was one of them. He used that in a pan of water, too, by the way. So it's very interesting, the connection that was already established with the mirror and the paranormal.
Right. Yeah, mirrors are weird. I mean, there's all kinds of stories of mirrors, and like I said, people that other than your own image appear in mirrors, which gives you that really creepy feeling. I've never seen it or never had it happen to me, but it just gives you that feeling when you just even talk about it.
Oh yeah. Here's another thing, I like that when that shows this little girl standing in front of the mirror, she's looking at herself, and she turns, and the other image turns differently than she does. That would have to be freaky, definitely. I see a lot of stuff like that on the internet. I've never actually experienced that, but that would definitely freak you out. Definitely.
It always makes me wonder, you're talking about mirrors being portal, what if
Hmm.
what if the back side of our mirror is actually the front side of their reality or world, and
Yeah.
they're looking in at us, or who knows what's on both planes of that
Or,
mirror.
so like Alice through the Looking Glass, there's a whole other world on the other side, a reverse of us. Yeah, because the mirror reverses.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. Um, one of the worst haunting cases, demonic cases I ever encountered, and I'll have to talk about it sometime, actually took place with a suicide in front of a mirror, in front of two cross mirrors, actually. Which is why I warn people about that. That's not a good idea to do that, to cross mirrors. But this actually took place, and it was very demonically and satanically connected, because the guy was doing, so he had a lot of satanic paraphernalia around where he was found. He actually killed himself in front of these mirrors. It's a long story. I won't go into it right now. But here's the interesting thing about it. It seems as if that those mirrors amplified what supposedly happened there that day and made it worse. And it brought forth entities that should not have been there. You know, definitely.
There's I don't I've heard, and I kind of believe it, but that mirrors will actually almost like record your whatever goes on, whatever reflects in the mirror. It kind of has a history or memory of that mirror may have, if it's something traumatic, that if that mirror
Yep.
goes to say another house or another place, it's just like a possessed object almost, that they'll have some
There
kind
are
of thing happening to that house because of that mirror, what it's been through.
there's a lot of stories of haunted mirrors and haunted houses. People actually seeing images from the past in these mirrors. And another interesting connection to that is a more modern day thing: TV screens. I've heard tons of stories about deceased people being seen on TV screens. And we're talking about the TV not being on, okay? Or if there's
Right.
like static, or like, what we call white static on it. By the way, the terminology for that is to actually see ghosts on your TV, but they call them ghosts because they're ghost images. They're not real ghosts, okay?
Right.
But they're ghost images. But they used to call them that. There's a lot of ghosts on there, which meant your signal was fading. But uh, actually, I've had several people tell me that they've seen their deceased relatives right at the moment, not long after they died, on their TV screens. It wouldn't even be on. Because if you look at the screen, and I think it's not as much now as with the LCD screens as it used to be. But if you look at it, it is a dark mirror, kind of a thing. You can't see reflections in it. So it is, in a way, like a mirror. So that's an interesting modern day connection. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you get into the technology of the tube TV for its time, it had all that coating and chemicals on it. Maybe that was like what we said. The human eye can only see so much into the our realm, or the wavelength, of the band. So maybe that chemicals would treat that as a mirror with a different property.
Well, I've done a lot of research and experiments with crystals and globes and stuff like that, to see if there was sort of like some way, like a prism type effect, that you could actually see some of this stuff. They say, I think infrared light has a lot to do with that too. There's a lot of I've done some interesting experiments with IR. But I think the very most interesting one of all is the blue light. The blue lights, you can manipulate them. Supposedly, some people say you can see other dimensions through the blue light technology. So what you're looking at are wave and light wavelengths. and the way they're perceived. And like you said just now, the human eye, the human ear, the human nose, every bit of it, we do not perceive, even like the animals around us, like dogs and cats. We don't perceive everything going on. If we could actually see everything around us, Geryl, I think it'd probably really freak us out. It would really scare us, I think, because we could see things I think there is a spiritual side to this universe. That's why I call myself a supernaturalist. Supernaturalists believe that there is a supernatural side to this universe, a spiritual side, call it what you may, whatever tag you want to give it, that is unseen. That's why my book is called The Road Unseen. How do you walk on a road unseen? It's there, you just don't see it, okay? But all of this is unseen by the human eye, by the human perception. That's what Huxley said. There is the known and the unknown, and in between are the doorways of perception. So you got to be right in that precise way for that perception to work. Just because you don't see it does not mean it does not exist. Absolutely not. You can't see the wind. You can't see the wind, but it can blow your house down. You can't see germs and microbes, but they can kill you.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a lot out there that we can't see.
Now, Mary's bringing up the Poltergeist movie, and I was thinking about that earlier too. Of the girl was hearing and seeing the stuff in the TV.
Yeah, I'll tell you this story. It's on my own personal story. When my brother passed away, my older brother died. His wife, my sister-in-law, said she saw him appear in her TV in her bedroom that very night he died there in the house, and she said she saw him. She told me about this, that she actually saw him appear. And I said, well, that could be sort of like what we call a visitation apparition. It's something that God lets you see to comfort you, maybe. It didn't scare her. It didn't make her feel bad. It made her feel good, really. And I think that's part of what this visitation apparition thing is. And, of course, you have the crisis apparition, which is a different thing. It can be there to warn you about something that is going to happen. Get out of this house right now, kind of a thing, because something bad is going to happen. It's a good idea to pay attention to that, folks, okay? Just to be on the safe side. If something comes to warn you, you might better pay attention. But you also have the visitation apparition, which is sort of, I think, a gift to a certain extent. It's something that's allowed you to have comfort in that, and a lot of that happens with the TV screens.
Yep.
Definitely. Yeah. There's been experimentations with white screens. We call it white noise screens, where they actually pick up, and this won't be hooked up to cable or antennas or anything. You shouldn't be getting this, okay? Although there's a certain amount even in the air that you can pick up. But you do know that very famous scientist years ago, Geryl, speculated that if you had the right instruments, you could tap back into time and see things that happened thousands of years ago. You might could see the crucifixion or see Plato or somebody, you might could see something that happened in the past. That's a very interesting theory because nothing, they say, ever actually goes away. No sight or sound. It's always there. You're just not able to tap into it when you want to. That's an interesting theory.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff about, even radios, mysterious broadcasts coming over, you think it's static, and all of a sudden you start hearing the voices, and that's what people use spirit boxes or ghost boxes now during a paranormal, trying to pick up transmissions, from the other side.
Well, this happened to a man. I didn't do it an actual investigation myself. I heard about it. It was a case history. But this man in I think this was back in like 1978 or something. After a thunderstorm, and this is in Texas, I forget where in Texas, I think it was Austin, I'm not sure. There appeared on the screen of his TV a broadcast sign. Remember they had the Indian chief on them, you know what I'm talking about?
Right.
This appeared on there with the call letters on it, they would have the call letters on there, W something, And I said, he didn't. He said, that was very unfamiliar. He took a picture of it, and it was on his screen. It appeared on his screen. And so it finally faded out and went away. But he did some research, and he come to find out that that TV station was a real TV station, but it went out of business like 10 years before that happened.
Wow.
Yeah. So
That's cool.
where did that come from? Yeah.
Oh, what's that?
Yeah, I've heard that telescope that supposedly, I think Galileo supposedly came up with it. Supposedly, that's the story that you could see back in time with it. There has actually been supposed pictures taken through this telescope that shows ancient stuff. A very fascinating subject on time travel. I'm fascinated by time travel of any kind of time travel, however it may be. But real time machines are called cameras.
Now, isn't that telescope there at the Vatican or whatever? Isn't it something like the Lucifer Project or something? It's kind of weird for a church to use Satan's name for a telescope.
Well, it's supposed, like I said earlier about my experiments with prisms and stuff. He made this out of whatever crystal or whatever, how he made it supposedly. It can pierce back through time and see these things. But it's like looking at it from a distance kind of a thing, I don't think you get extreme close-ups on it and all that. But that's supposedly what it does. Now, of course, you hear a lot of stories. I think this might be a really good made-up story, but something started it somewhere. And like I said, the scientist, I think it was Alexander Graham Bell, who said that, you might could hear sounds. He was very interested in sound technology, that you might could pick up sounds of the past. You might hear Lincoln's speech or Washington's speech. You might could pick it up and hear it again, because nothing like that, they say, ever supposedly goes away. It stays in the atmosphere itself forever.
Yep. Speaking of telephones, there's a lot of stories of ghostly phone calls and lines being cut or not active anymore, but the phone still rings, or loved ones or spirits, coming across phone conversations.
And B, I read your comment. That was a visitation apparition. That was a gift given to you to assure you that, that's what I said to somebody the other day, Geryl. After all my many years, and I'm not going to go into how many years, that I have been in this field of research, there is one thing I can come away with. There truly is something after death. Absolutely. I've seen too much not to believe that.
Yep. Absolutely. There has to be.
Mm-hmm. Time travel, I think, will one day be. Here's a lot of interesting conception on this, okay? My interesting take on it. What if a lot of these UFO sightings, what if a lot of this weird, mysterious stuff that goes on are actually people from the future doing stuff? We have to wonder what percentage of that might be relatable to that. I'd love to see that picture, Aunt B, if you still have it. It'd be very interesting. Send it to me at ghostwolfdc@gmail.com. I'd like to look at it, because there are very many stories of visitation apparitions. People that I should say, the very famous ghosts of Flight 401 were actually crisis apparitions. They appeared on planes where they died with the equipment they were connected to.
There's a lot of myths and lore about airplanes, like the crews that disappear or flights that disappear, then they show back up, just kind of like the ghost ships you hear about,
Oh, yeah. A very famous story, Geryl, about the glider, the German glider, where the guy, he met, it was right before World War II broke out in Germany. And there was a group of guys that got together and they flew a glider. That was their hobby. It was a glider, small light glider. And he took off in that glider and didn't come back. And their thing was that one day that they would all meet back there again after the war. Some of them made it alive through the war, some of them didn't. And one or two come back, and I think the girlfriend of this guy came back, and they met on that field. And while they was there, this glider came back and landed. The
Oh,
same glider. And they said, and when they opened it up, he was a skeleton in it. And he had made a promise that he would come back too. You know, uh, did he come back, or was he stuck up in a tree all that time, or what? That's a very interesting story.
well, Aunt B lost the picture, Dennis, so you're not gonna
Uh,
be able to see it.
Too bad.
But
That's too
that's
bad.
sad.
I've lost a lot of stuff like that too, B. I know how it is.
Yeah,
But
there's all kinds of plane stories and war stories, and I mean, you can just talk all day about
oh
just
yeah,
the stories on the war.
oh yeah. A lot of connect. Like I say, war is a traumatic event. A lot of people dying. A lot of people see each other for the last time. Whatever the case may be, war is one of the worst traumatic events known to mankind. Definitely. It would have to definitely stir up some paranormal activity. Without absolutely.
Well,
That's
let
interesting.
alone,
Interesting that your screen went black. I'll see. But it could have been a glitch in the matrix.
yeah, could have been. Yeah, like you're saying, war is very traumatic, let alone for the people participating in the horrors of battle, but the family, that lost loved ones, and, then they could come back to the family, or they stay or residual on the battlefield. You hear about it all the time in the Civil War stories.
Oh yeah. Civil War was the most bloodiest conflict this country was ever in. More people died in it, I think, than in World War II. People from our country, that is. So it was a very traumatic event, and it not only killed a lot of people, but it destroyed a lot of families, split a lot of families along those lines. So it had an extra punch of trauma to it. You know what I'm saying? More so than just a regular war. But the interesting thing about the mirrors she was talking about, a lot of mirrors, I've always wondered about Bloody Mary has to take place in front of a mirror, the Bloody Mary thing, that's another connection with mirrors I forgot to mention earlier. It is used to contact spirits, supposedly through. But all these urban legends, like I say, they make up our culture. They make us. And this has been going on for thousands of years. Before television, before books, before things were written down, there was the oral stories that were told around the campfires and the fireplaces, told in the families, passed down from generation to generation. That was a wonderful thing. It kept our history alive.
Yep.
And here's the interesting thing: social stuff like what we're on right now is doing its part to keep a lot of this alive. And that's why I tell people, Geryl, no matter what happens to you, if something happened to you, whatever the case is, you need to write that down. You need to record it. If you don't want to write it, record it. Just like we're being recorded right now. Write it, get it down. Make sure it's a live thing, that it lives, because no story should ever be lost to history. But if something very extraordinary to you has happened, you need to write it down while the memory's good. One day you'll wish you had if you didn't. Don't put yourself in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we talked about before. The Native Americans still have an oral history that they pass down generation to generation, where we have kind of lost that a little bit, of us. I mean, we write down our history, but it's usually, about something prominent, or, an invention or something happened during this time. But it's not like the stories that used to be told around the fireplaces or on the front porch or around the campfires like we used to have, you know.
When I was a kid, Geryl, I would go in my neighborhood. I'd go from porch to porch in the evenings. The old folks would sit out on the porch. You know, they didn't watch TV. They would sit out on the porch and talk. I would go from porch to porch, and I'd always get them started on ghost stories. Okay, and every family had this ghost story. I got them all cataloged up here. Uh, every family had this ghost story. My own family had ghost stories like that. Oh, I was fascinated by that. Still am. It's never gotten old to me. The stories that they told, whether they were true or not, they're still neat to hear. And I used to do a lot of school presentations. I've done a lot of stories and school ghost stories at schools and stuff. And the little kids would always come up to me at the end and say, "Mr. Carroll, do you believe in ghosts?" And I would tell them this. I didn't want to scare them too much. I would tell them, well, I believe in ghost stories, and I still do. I love ghost stories. No matter what, they may not only just be ghosts, there may be other things connected with it too. But I like those weird, strange stories. That's what I like.
You know, that might be a good name for your show. You know, when you start up your new show for folklore and stuff, maybe you should call it Porch to Porch.
Yeah, that would be. A lot of people wouldn't understand that one, though, William. I'm afraid. I mean, Gerald, I'm afraid they wouldn't understand that because nobody does that. Porch to porch, they don't know what that is. Porch is where you put it. The porch is where you pick up your Amazon package. Oh, okay. But that was, the old folks that would get together and pass those stories down. You know, they would tell this happened to my so and so, so and so. I found that fascinating, and that's some of the weirdest, creepiest stories you would ever hear. I mean, that to me, that was candy to me as a kid. That it kept me wanting to do it. Unfortunately, as time went on, I got out of doing that. But I went to books and libraries for my stories, which was a wider range, you might say. But you're right, though. A lot of families have lost that. Families are not close like they used to be. We used to go see our relatives. We used to have reunions. We used to have nobody does that anymore. Nobody even knows who their next door neighbor is anymore. I think mine are mostly crackheads. But anyway, nobody does that anymore. Nobody gets out. The only thing they socialize on is what we're on right now. That's it.
Right.
But that's okay. You know, things change. Time goes on. But
they always said that
we lose a lot, though. We lose a lot.
They always said, you know, the stuff that you don't hear or talk about in the parlors, which would be the family room, you know, in the olden days, you go out to the porch to hear the real good stories.
Oh yeah, porch swing type stuff. But here's the neat thing about that, Geryl. The stories live on, and that's the main thing. You know, if you hear it, you pass it on. Pass it on. Don't hold on to it. Pass it on. Even if it's a stranger, pass it on because the stories still live. The stories, that's part of the history that still goes on. And it's a good thing that our history lives like we should live. When our history dies, we will die. Because that will be a vital part of us that unfortunately a lot of people don't recognize that. But it is a vital part of what we are.
Yep, we got to keep that history alive somehow. You know, it'd be nice to have it written down, but at least if you can't write it down or remember to, at least tell your children or friends or family so they can at least have a memory of it and kind of tell their version of it.
Oh yeah. When I first started out in paranormal investigation, I was I think about 14 years old. And one of the first things I done, there was this old lady that was a friend of the family. I recorded her ghost story. I still have it somewhere. I sound like a little bitty kid, and I was. I sound very young. But I recorded her ghost story, and I'll tell you about it someday. Fascinating ghost story. I said I got to get this down. I was one of the very first people in my family that actually had a tape recorder. Okay,
Oh,
so I said I've got to get this, you know. So I did record it. I recorded my grandmother's ghost story as well. But they're still here too, just in case something tape gets old and breaks one day. They're still here, but I want to get them out, you know, get them out and talk about them and tell them so that they'll live on, you know, and our stories will live on. And here's the interesting thing, Geryl. One day, you and I, all of us, will be stories.
yep, that
I
is
hope.
very
I
true.
hope they remember. I hope they remember to tell our stories.
Well, Dennis, I think this has been a wonderful chat. Do you want to keep going, or shall we
Uh, well,
continue
we're
this
about at the hour
tomorrow?
and a half. About the hour and a half. We might can make part two tomorrow, maybe, or something. We'll see what happens then.
Well, go ahead and give everybody your information and the shows you got going on and what you're up to, and then I'll end
Okay,
it and
well,
we'll.
like we said earlier, I've got in the works a show that I'm gonna be doing on folklore and legends and myths and stuff like that. I'm also still working on the Midnight Road excursions into the unknown, which is going to tell a lot about these stories I've mentioned today. I'm working on that, and then I've got coming up this Sunday night my show on YouTube is Demonology Today with Grizzly Chris. And this episode is going to be the demonic mind, the mind of the demonic. So it's going to be a very interesting show, and that'll be at 9 o'clock p.m. tomorrow night, Eastern Standard Time. And if you want to reach me in any way possible, if you need to talk or whatever, or give me your stories, whatever the case, might put it in my next book. You never know. Uh, You can reach me at ghostwolfdc@gmail.com or at my website, denniswcarroll.com. There you go, sir.
All right. And on Wednesday nights, me and Chiro, Jane, my wife, we have a show called Night Owl Lounge. It's at 12:30 a.m. on Wednesday late nights, if you will, or Thursday early mornings. And we concentrate on the chat. We talk with everybody and bring up their questions, and we just get into all kinds of stuff. It's really fun, you know, getting in with the chat and hearing what they're saying. So we're doing that every week. And then Sundays at 6 p.m. Central, we have Piercing the Veil. We get into a little more woo subjects and dog men and ghosts and paranormal and UFOs and all that good stuff. And we always have guests or try to have a guest on. And this week we have Rob from Bigfoot, Michigan Rob, which you guys all know is
Oh, yeah.
on Texas Front Porch platform with Blondes and Booze, and Jason and Donnie Cho questions everything. And
That guy knows his stuff. He's a really neat guy. I like him.
so we got
Been on
that
his
on
show. I've
Sundays,
been
and
on his show.
that'll be 6 p.m. Central. And then later that night, like Dennis said, he'll be on Grizzly's show with his Demonology Today. And then we got new shows coming up, whether Dennis gets his folklore and cultural show going. I'm really looking forward to that, along with your was it Midnight Road series?
Yep. Yeah,
So,
that's my video series. I'm got to get to work on that pretty soon, and been working on some scripts on it. But I got a lot of technical issues to deal with too on it. Make sure it comes out good, makes it presentable anyway. But we appreciate you listening today, checking us out, and make sure you keep those prayers and that support for William going. I'm sure he would appreciate it, whatever you could do, and keep praying for him, and keep us in your thoughts as well. Hope you all have a good Saturday, and maybe go have your barbecue or something. Why not? And
Yeah.
uh, throw something on the Barbie, as uh, uh, Paul Hogan used to say.
Yeah, so if you can, go to all our channels and heart, subscribe, hit that notification bell. It helps us out a lot. We're trying to grow this community. William lost a lot of subscribers because of YouTube glitches and whatever else happened during that time. And we're trying to build the channel back up along with Midwest Night Watchers. We're slowly growing, and then Dennis is going to have his show, and we're just growing and trying to get this community back together. And if you can, go to William Nighthawk's GoFundMe and help this family out and show a little love. And they need every penny they can get to help with medical bills that aren't covered by insurance or any other way. So if you can, please show them some love there. And we will see you tomorrow morning. And I don't know if William will be on, but it might be just me and Dennis again talking something. I don't know what we're going to talk about, but we'll figure that
Yeah,
out if it's a
that's okay.
continuation or something new.
We'll probably go off the rails, no doubt about it.
Well, Dennis, it was good to have you and see you and talk to you, and we'll see everybody tomorrow.
Have a good day.
God bless and love you all.